We are starting to move toward a closure here in a little while, but we're beginning session number 7. We're talking about unique kids, and I always tell everybody, if you want to surprise a unique kid, unique up on them. I'm sorry, but that's how you surprise.
I have to live with that.
That's how you surprise a unique kid, unique up on them. All right. So as we start session 7, Kay, really what we're talking about here is we're talking about these unique kids. And we talked about the introvert is unique because they're only 25% of the population. But let's do a brief excursus for a second. Let's talk about blended families. And would you address that for a moment?
Yes. We realize that a lot of you are in blended families. And the challenge of a blended family is you're blending even more histories, because your spouse has a childhood history, but they also have a history with a previous spouse many times. So those histories, are all colliding. I think the thing that can be most helpful in a blended family is to realize that it's the spouses who choose each other. The kids don't choose the spouse or the step-parent. And to keep that in mind is to be very respectful of building a relationship slowly over time, and to ask some of these hard questions, like, so how is it for you having two dads and going back and forth between both? Or, I don't need to replace your dad, but I want to be here, and but I really want to understand, what's it like for you? Because I know your mom chose me, but you didn't really have a choice. So, those are hard questions. And it's just like we were talking about with the vacillator kid, being willing to hear whatever they have to say, even if you disagree with it, shows them that you respect them enough to hear their feelings. And it's a challenge to blend a family, but even identifying the different styles that we're talking about within a family can help you understand that child all the better, because you didn't often, in a blended family, you weren't with that child from the time they were born. You come in at some certain age that child is when you enter the family. And so understanding an attachment style or a love style can really help you relate to that child in a way that's going to be helpful to you in building a relationship. Would you add anything to that?
Well, I would just say attachment is really taking off in this world. It's the new paradigm that is being used to look at people, romantic relationships, the reactions, the predictability of what we can anticipate in terms of people's behaviors, no less a blended family. Scientific American, January 2011, getting attached. Even your own university here in town, as I said last year, has a lot of research going on with respect to attachment theory. Now, what we're trying to do here, Kay and Mylan, what they do, we take the research from the researchers that are way up on the top shelf, and we try and put them down on the bottom shelf where all of us can understand them, or lower shelves, along with blending biblical principles, because we really believe attachment is the heart of God. He created the birthing process. He created this thing called attachment and bonding. He created the child's mind to be wired as the child reflects back and works with the parent, and actually created this brain-shaping mechanism called motherhood. He created it. Now, this broken world messes it up. So if we can understand it, we have a chance of correcting it. We're talking about these unique children, and we're talking about blended families. And we're going to also talk and move on now to the highly sensitive child. I'll never forget, probably 20 years ago, Kay and I were in a bookstore, and I picked up this book, and it was on the highly sensitive person, which is referenced in your bibliography. And I said to Kay, hey, here's a book about you, a highly sensitive person. Now, it didn't help that she was 5 aisles over, and that there were 10 people who turned around and looked at me and looked at her, and that was...
Introverts don't like that.
Introverts don't like that. And Kay just blew it off. I showed it to her. I was waving it, and she blew it off. And then some years later, I don't know, a significant period of time, you were moseying through a bookstore and you saw that book and you picked it up and you said,
discreetly and quietly,
unlike the extroverted, noisy person, she picked it up and she said, oh my gosh, this is me. This is about me. So for Kay to be an introvert, an avoider, and a highly sensitive person, makes her unique and makes her uniquely her. And to get to know her required, for me as a husband first, to go ahead and begin to try to master and understand what kind of person my wife really was. You know, when you get on an airplane, they tell you in case the oxygen mask drop, adults, put yours on first, because unless yours is on, you won't be able to help the child. Don't help the child first, help yourself. Because if you're not available because you don't have enough oxygen, you can't help anybody. And we say the same thing in our parenting book. You need to put on your oxygen mask first. And you need to grow and work on you and stay one step ahead of your kid. That's all you need to do, one step ahead. That's it, just one. And that's a good piece of news. So the highly sensitive child is very sensitive to feelings and moods of other people. They're highly empathetic, typically. They get upset at disharmony. They're sensitive to people's feelings. They're real feelers. And they're very sensitive to the feelings and feeling states of others. They're concerned if people are upset, and it distresses them. They're also upset if they see things that are distressing to them. Somebody gets hurt, an animal or a pet dies. Anything like that causes them to be highly distressed. In addition, they can often be highly sensitive to sensory things like noise, sights, lots of input. They get easily overwhelmed, perhaps even to touch. Just this morning, my wife cut a tag out of a blouse she was going to wear because the tag was scratchy, and she just cut it out.
I don't like tags.
Just this morning. And so sensitive to touch, loud, overstimulating, taste, and we call this person the highly sensitive person. They are oftentimes born this way, just more sensitive by personality type. So how would you say, what else would you talk about in terms of...
Well, I think these kids need a longer period of time to learn to manage feelings because they just feel them more intensely. So one child might be able to self-regulate pretty well by the time they're 4 or 5. This child might take, until they're 6 or 7. I always get the question from moms with boys that have highly sensitive boys. Oh, he's gonna cry at school, and what can I do? And the kids will socialize. He will get teased, and he'll learn that there's a safe place to cry and a safe place there's unsafe places to cry. But it's okay to tell him, it's not everybody understands feelings, and there may be people who make fun of you if you show your feelings to them, and those are not safe people to show your feelings to. And there are unsafe people in the world, but it's always safe here at home for you to tell me what you're feeling. And if you need to cry, it's okay. I think it's very sad that men are socialized, especially sensitive men, to not cry or not show feelings, because it's just, what woman doesn't want a sensitive husband? And yet sometimes we tend to stamp out that trait. I think these kids are more sensitive to difficulty in social interactions, and so they may need more help. I know I was in a triangle of friends in 4th and 5th and 6th grade where one was the queen and she was always in, and the other 2 of us, one was in or one was out. And I suffered in those relationships, and I didn't know how to handle them. And neither parent recognized how difficult that was for me or gave me help in how do I handle this situation. And so you need to really notice these kids and how they're doing socially, and they just need, they get bothered and upset more easily. Now, you may have a kid, these kids may come out at birth more sensitive to all the stimuli, and they may need a quieter environment to even eat, or they wake up easily, they don't often sleep through the night. So there's some challenges, definitely, but I think if you help a kid understand their uniqueness and explain to them that they're highly sensitive and that that's a good trait and how God can use it, then it helps in their level of acceptance. I do want to distinguish this from motor sensory integration problems. Some kids, I had many moms actually come up to me in the Mothers of Preschoolers group and say, I can't even take my child to a birthday party. They just melt down. And sometimes that is a sensory integration problem, and it's like when everything's coming in at once, it's just, too much processing at once, and, they may be really melt down because they don't know how to process all that's going on. And, those moms took their kids to some sensory integration experts, and I remember one mom in particular coming up and saying, wow, 6 months later, we went to a birthday party and he did really well. And they did a lot of desensitization type things with him so that he would be less overwhelmed by stimuli. So just an important.
Sometimes if you have a highly sensitive child and the child is not attuned with the parent is not attuned to them, I should say, and listening and empathetic and engaged with that process, and the child learns like there's no place for me to take this into relationship, what they'll do is they'll end up often somatizing, or the distress they feel inside will be somatized. I have a very good friend I'm on the radio with, Dave Stoop, and he somatized, he held in the anger in his home, and he had an ulcer when he was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Kay was, as a young child, was upset, and I was upset, as I shared with you. So oftentimes a highly sensitive kid will tend to come out in their body in different ways, everything from headaches to upset stomachs to ulcers and digestive issues, all kinds of things. Aren't just medical problems, they have emotional reasons why some of these things start off and creep into the child's life. Always look for the highly sensitive child, and if so, they require special handling. Now, with this particular child, I think it's always important to paint the picture of the future. And I'll ask you a question. When highly sensitive people grow up, what is their contribution to our society? What do they do? That's not a very quick response. You must not know. But what do they do? What do they contribute to our society? Art. They could be some of the finest artists in the whole world. What else do they do? Music. They write some of the music we download on our iPods. Sometimes highly sensitive people will be great lyricists. They might be great musicians. They might also be great composers. And so a lot of times we will look at a child like this and say, what's their contribution? And then we have to go out on a corporate event. We pay big money to go into the play they wrote. Mm-hmm. And you see, we never stop and tell that child, you have a future out there that God is going to use with your sensitivities. He has a reason for you.
I think it's important to tell all your kids, help them understand where they hold stress in their body. Because even as adults, some of us get headaches, some of us get tight shoulders, some of us get stomach aches, some of us hold it in our back and get back aches. So we all hold stress in a different place, but a good little exercise I've done with a lot of kids is if they have a stomach ache or they have an ache or pain somewhere that's consistent, and there's no medical reason that they can really find for it, then have them draw. Can you draw me your stomach? Or if your stomach could talk when it's hurting, what would it say? And, just the act of putting words to that ache and pain can sometimes make sense of where that's coming from. So as adults, we often don't pay enough attention to our bodies and what they're telling us.
So that's the highly sensitive child. How many of you may have a highly sensitive child out there? Okay, good. Look at all those hands up there. We're glad we could touch you with this information because it's important for you to understand they are a part of our population, and we need to love them and care for them. And because they're highly sensitive, they require some special handling. Let's talk about the free-spirited or the creative child. This is every straight A student parent's nightmare. Right? See, they are the free-spirited kid. They're the one that's creative. And the free-spirited kid likes to be spontaneous. They don't like structure. They're curious. They're adventuresome. They take great pleasure in starting stuff new. When newness wears off, they like to move on to something new again. Piano lessons might be exciting for exactly 1 week. And then when routine kicks in, they're not interested in it anymore. They're flexible, adapted. They're very tolerant. They try new things. This is our third child, John. John is our free-spirited kid who is different than everybody else. As a matter of fact, being third in line, Kevin, Amy, John, John stepped into school at Mission Viejo High School, where Mark Sanchez, by the way, from the New York Jets is the quarterback. Just thought I'd throw that in. And
very important.
Very important. And he walked in, and some teacher said, "Oh, you're Kevin and Amy's brother." And the first thing out of his mouth was, "And I'm nothing like them." We knew we were in trouble right then. And certainly he took a different path than our other kids. They tend to they're kinesthetic learners. They oftentimes are inquisitive, so you ask them a question, they'll ask you a question back. They may procrastinate, they don't like routine. They tend to slip through the cracks of the public schools because a lot of free-spirited kids on the Myers-Briggs are SFPs, and a lot of the teachers in the school system are STJs, very rigid, and this is what we do, and we do this, and this, and they are not picked up. But John responded to the teacher that loved him and saw something in him. He'd rise up and do a great job. If the teacher sort of blew him off and didn't get him, sort of let him fall through the cracks, John was just all over it, and he was done, and he was out of there. So a lot of times what we do with this kind of kids, we question their character, and we go, "See, you're lazy, or you lack these character qualities that your older brother has, your older sister has, et cetera, et cetera." And they're misunderstood. They're often bored. They're often misdiagnosed with ADD or ADHD. So in comparison to siblings, they don't like to be compared because they feel like they fall short. They are a free-spirited kid. And do free-spirited kids do things as adults that, again, we go pay money for? Sure. They create. They do a lot of stuff. And they'll try stuff that nobody else will try. Kay, how do we help this kid?
Well, the free spirit, the biggest challenge is structure, because they don't do structure very well, and so that can be very frustrating to a parent. But some of the things we did with John is we would let him plan adventures. He was in charge of the family adventure. One time he took us all down to Mexico when it was a little safer, and he had been down there a few times, and so he was the leader, and he took us to different restaurants and things he had been to when he was a
We went
high school
surfing
student.
and went and had lobster.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there were, instead of giving him piano lessons, I remember one time signing him up for a class where you got to go interact with wild animals with somebody who trained animals, because that sounded like such an adventure. I think for his 10th birthday, we took him, we had a friend that was a pilot, and we let him go up in a small plane. He just loved it. So it's kind of looking at the adventurous side of this kid and trying to meet that need for something that's out of the box. They like things that are out of the box. You're still trying to teach them some responsibility. I used to tell John, look, when you grow up and move out, you're going to have to write checks, pay bills, and pay your taxes. And, so you're going to have to learn a certain amount of structure in your life. And if you don't, you're going to be the one who pays for it. But I understand that's a hard part for you. That's not something you enjoy, but, we all have something in life we don't enjoy. The only thing that worked with him, I remember one time telling him, you didn't clean up your room again, so it's been a month, that's reasonable.
It's now dangerous.
It's now dangerous. It's starting to smell. So if you don't clean it up by Friday, no problem, I'll clean it up, but you may not have some of the stuff you're used to having.
Oh, this is a funny story.
So he, of course, blew me off because free spirit people do that. So I went into his room and I took his surfboard, his skateboard, one other thing, I can't remember, everything that he used every day, the important things.
Yeah.
And I put them in my neighbor's garage because I knew he was a very good hunter. And I knew he would never think to look there. And so it took him until about
half a week.
Well, no, actually it was, he went up right away after school to find his skateboard.
Yeah.
He's like, hey Mom, have you seen my skateboard? And I said, oh yeah, I picked it up for you. And he goes, well, where'd you put it? And I go, well, that's for me to know and you to find out when I'm ready to give it back to you. I told you I'd pick it up, but I told you if I picked it up, you might not find it for a while. He was so mad at me. Then he figured out his surfboard was gone. So it was like, in some cases, you put consequences in place for these kids so they realize what it feels like to not come through for somebody. There is a consequence. So we're not saying they just get free reign and they have no responsibility. But really understanding who they are, and they're probably a lot of these kids don't go to college because they absolutely hate school. You have to sit there, memorize, spit it back, read it, take a test. That is not the way they learn. And so we told John early on, I know this isn't the way you learn, this isn't the best fit for you, and we'll try and find you the teachers that, get your temperament. And some did, and he really thrived in their classes. But it was a teacher who had a sense of humor and was more flexible, and I would change teachers if he got a really rigid teacher, especially in elementary school. In junior high, you can't do that anymore. But in elementary school, if he got a really rigid teacher, I got him out of that class because I knew it was just going to be a year-long war.
So the other night, I had a chance to play my guitar with the Eagles, and I did.
And the Eagles were on the
Well, it was on a CD,
iPod.
and it was in my bedroom.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I was playing with the Eagles. But the guitar I was playing on, my son John moved to Hawaii when he was 18 years old, and he lived there for 6 years.
Doesn't that sound like a free spirit?
Doesn't it sound like a free spirit? And, he surfed, played music, and worked, and surfed, played music, and worked, and played music and surfed, played music, surfed, and worked, and somehow got enough food in his mouth. We didn't rescue him, and he survived for 6 years. And one of the things he did is because he is a creative person. He studied under a luthier in Maui, and he became an apprentice to this luthier. And the guitar I was playing is probably one of the most beautiful guitars you'd ever see, and he made it. And it looks like it's professionally made. It is professionally made guitar. If you looked at it, you'd think somebody made 10,000 of these guitars. It was his first. And I think with this kind of a kid, it's easy to not see the genius and the brilliance inside that these kids really have. And it is yet to be discovered, and their areas of brilliance are yet to be uncovered. And it is our job to help them find that. And as you said, Kay, to teach them the unfortunate aspects of I do have to keep up with life.
Right.
And yet I can also try to blend this issue of being a free spirit. How many of you have a free-spirited child in here? Okay, good. All right, good. They are over here in the Midwest too. Love it. They are around.
When John was in high school, we got the Myers-Briggs book, which is a temperament analysis, and it's called Please Understand Me. And we read him the description of the sensory perceptive kid. And he smiled from ear to ear. He goes, "That's exactly me." And we said, "Yeah, this is your temperament. There's a lot of people out there just like you." And I think it was the first time he ever felt like, even though we had tried so hard to help him understand this, that there was nothing wrong with him. Because you don't fit into the school system and you spend 18 years there, you can really feel like there's something wrong with you by the time you get out of it. I mean, how many of you that are free spirits yourself, how many of you hated school?
Yeah, okay. Lots of hands.
And it's like, so, that is not where they're going to thrive. And if you can help them understand that, this is not where you're going to shine. You're going to shine in sports, or you're going to shine making a guitar. They're often amazing athletes because they're so aware of their bodies and in space. John
would make a phenomenal helicopter pilot. His kinesthetic abilities to feel everything that is going on, he just has fabulous capacities that way. So there is hope, but they're going to be a different route. If you expect, I went to Mizzou, my mom went to Mizzou, everybody goes to Mizzou, and then you have free-spirited kid. He may not go to Mizzou.
That's right.
But the family vilifies him, and there's something wrong, and the family does not accept that. Our kids accept John's different, but they all still hang out. They have a good time as adults. Let's talk about the determined child. Why did we pick the word determined child instead of Dobson's strong-willed child?
Well, I think strong-willed almost started to have a negative kind of flavor to it, because a strong will is not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. In breaking the will, sometimes you break the child, and we want to make a distinction between breaking the will and breaking the child. What we want to do, I would say a better word would be to channel that will instead of breaking it. I think that, and I'm not saying there's nothing good in that book. I'm just saying, I think...
No, that's not what we're saying.
But I think there's a big difference between a determined child and an angry child. Now, a determined child might get more angry easily when you put something in their way, but there are kids that are just angry because of something that's going on in the family dynamic, and when you start to fix that family dynamic, their anger goes away. That's different from the determined child who is just sort of born a leader and comes out and can argue like a lawyer by the time they're 3. And if you have one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They are the pesterers. They will pester you to death, and they need a strong rule around pestering and they need a definition of pestering early on. I remember telling one of my kids, the firstborn, pestering is when you ask mommy something over and over and over after I've said no. So if you pester me, I'm going to ask you to take a timeout. And, he got a lot of timeouts for pestering. And today's a top salesman, but you have to see these kids as he is. He's very competitive, salesman. And he's one of the top salesmen in his company. He's won trips all over the world. So we like you to see this kid as leadership in the rough.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's what they are. They're leaders. They pop out that way, but you've got the rough version when they're kids. And so channeling that is really a challenge because they're always, always pushing the limit. And always they have a very high sense of fairness, and nothing is ever fair. That's not fair.
When he went to school, he worked in a bike shop because we made our kids go to school and work and support a part of their economy. So we didn't support them totally. We made them help in various ways. So he worked in a bike shop, and he was going to school full-time down in San Diego State, and he also worked in a bike shop. And he worked there all the way through. He wouldn't quit. We kept saying, Kevin, you don't have to work this many hours. And the reason that he wanted to keep that job was because he had the longest run for the #1 salesman going, and he didn't want to let it go. And that's why he stayed. He said, Dad, no, I got this thing going. And I go, what thing? He goes, I'm the #1 guy. I've been that for 12 months. I got to keep the 13th month. And that determination is with him to this very day. And he's determined in many things that he does. And it's quite delightful to watch. But at first, it can be scary to have that determined child. You go, Lord, what do I do with this? And how do I handle these kids, male or female? There's some great leaders that emerge. And I can vilify them and say, there's something wrong with you. You should be obeying me just exactly right on cue. Your little sister does. Why don't you? And we need to understand that obedience is important. I am the parent. You are the child. However, someday you're going to be a great leader. And for these kinds of kids, one of the things we do to help them is we would always ask their opinion for family activities because you're going to get it anyhow, okay? So you might as well ask them and say, hey, what do you think would be a good idea? Should we go up the I-5 or the 405? Because if we go this way, we'd see that, and we go this way, we'd see that. And they'd say, the 5. We'd go, oh, that's a good idea, and we'd go that way. We'd let them help to create direction to the family and let them see that their leadership and ideas and opinions were of value. And the ones that weren't, we would say, I don't think that's a great idea. Thanks for contributing an idea. I'm gonna go with John's or Amy's or Kelly's on that one, and we're gonna choose that path. But the goal is you want to inspire them and help them to believe, and you need to encourage them that leadership is a part of what they're going to be, and we want to, guide them along.
So we're not saying you can't set limits with any kid. Limits are a very important part of secure kid. Bonding creates security, but so do limits. I've worked with moms who, especially when the dad was out of the house, had absolutely no control over their 3 and 4-year-olds. And I mean no control. And I would say to these moms, if you can't make your words stick when they are 3 and 4 and you're physically bigger than them, what do you think is going to happen when they're 13 and 14 and they're taller than you? If you think you have no control now, just wait. And so, limits are very important. The most miserable kids I've seen are kids with no limits. They are whiny, they're demanding, they're angry, and they're always pushing the limit. They're practically begging for a limit. And so limits are very important. But I think what we do is we get in the nag and threat mode. And with a determined kid, once you hit your brother, it's like, well, you already know that's a rule. You don't stop and say, now that's not a rule. If you do that again, it's just like, okay, take a seat. I'll tell you when you're just right there where you are, take a seat. We'll tell you when time's up. Sometimes with these kids, and I remember this even in my own life, and we actually put a list in the book of positive adjectives, because there were times where he would wear me down and I would just be like, oh, this kid is so hard. He's just so, always got an agenda and I'm always supposed to be on it. And so I would look through that list of positive words and think, yeah, okay, he is a leader. He is bright. He is. And I would remind myself of all the positive qualities, because it felt like I was just having to, guide that difficult one all day, every day. And it could kind of set up a negative loop where he felt like, I don't think my mom even likes me, and then he'd act out more. So
describe that lose-lose loop really quick.
Well, there's kind of we can get this in with a lot of kids. It just doesn't have to be a determined kid, but when your kid, they go through stages. They're just cute and adorable, and then all of a sudden they hit this stage, 2, 5, 10, where they're just kind of obnoxious. And you're kind of like, oh, I don't really even like my own kid. I'm so embarrassed to think that or say it out loud, but it's like, this kid is really annoying. And
that's a good time to blame the other parent for that,
Right.
Mom or dad is a pleaser.
That's why we're having so much trouble.
Right.
So, and then the kid senses this feeling in you, and they realize they have a lot of power to make you react and push your button. So they love the power. They love having that control. So they push it, and you get more kind of annoyed, and it just starts into this negative loop where you go downhill from there, because they're pushing buttons harder and you're reacting more, and pretty soon, you're just in this kind of spiral downward. And I think it takes some really starting over, being consistent with the boundaries, and really looking for the good in this kid and letting him know what that is that you see, and reminding yourself sometimes, what do I love about this kid, because I'm losing sight of it. And we all have those times with our kids.
Kevin still has an agenda. This very week, he emailed me a picture of a car he wants me to buy so he can drive it on the weekends, and I'll drive his car, we'll trade.
It's true.
And so he wants me to get this muscle car that he can drive around on the weekends. I'll drive it in the middle of the week. We'll trade. And he's bent on this agenda, and he's trying to drive it. And this week I got another email about it. Dad, are you sure you don't want that Dodge Challenger? That thing really rolls. And it's akin back to the muscle era of the '60s that I grew up in, when cars were cars. All right, let's go on.
And sounded like cars, like
and they
boats.
sounded like cars, and they had torque. The car would do this when you hit the pedal. Anyhow, never mind. All right, now. Kate, you actually earlier began to allude to and talk about the premature child in yourself, and then even the child that was born with some birth trauma and difficulties. Let's take the last couple of minutes here and talk about the premature child.
Well, I include this in unique kids because I do think premature kids do have some unique issues, especially depending on the length of the hospitalization and the amount of intervention it took to keep them alive. But what you'll typically see in these kids is they do have some attachment issues, because their first experience of life is not all warm and nurturing and cozy. It's literally life-saving interventions that can be painful and difficult. And so one of the things I've helped moms do is, especially as this child, by the time they're 4 or 5, they're old enough to talk about what it was like when they were a baby, and to link some of their current behavior. I notice when I sometimes touch you or want to give you a hug, you sort of tighten up. I think maybe that's because when you were a little tiny baby, they had to do things that kind of hurt you on your skin to save your life. And I think sometimes now when someone touches you, your body almost remembers that. And even though you don't remember it, your body remembers it. So it might be a little uncomfortable, but I think it's really important for you to learn to take hugs. So you're helping make sense of that child's behavior for them, because they don't understand why they do what they do. They don't understand why they feel what they feel. And a lot of times there's just a resistance to touch, a resistance to sometimes even food and eating. If they've had a lot of tube feeding, I've worked with clients that were premature that just don't really like to eat. And I think that just goes way, way back. So making the links between some of their current behavior, and there's a lot more on that in the book than we really have time to go into here. But I think it's a great tool to have. I know there's one mom here in the congregation that went home and had a talk like that with her teenage daughter, and said she felt she was an avoider, and she just really worked on pulling that child in and helping them understand her aversion to touch and her avoider tendencies. And I just talked to her yesterday, and she said a lot has happened in a year. She will actually come now to her parents and say, I need to talk. And she said she would have never done that before. So just knowing these things is really helpful, because it helps you help your child, and it helps you know how to help your child. So that is the end of session, Seven. And we are going to take just a couple minutes to bring our couple up, and then we will begin our next session, and you won't want to miss it, so don't go too far.